Hi everyone and welcome back. Today we're going back to 2003 with the socket 754 and the AMD Athlon 64 3200 Plus and the DFI LanParty UT nforce3 250GB. I'm always having a hard time separating the 754 and the 939 CPUs, but the socket 574 CPU has a little square in the middle with no pins, smaller than a socket A. Other than that, the default CPU mounting is similar. This motherboard offers a standard, for that time, 2 IDE connectors and 1 floppy connector, next to the 20-pin ATX connector, and the motherboard has a 4-pin 12V connector near the CPU. For additional storage, the motherboard has 2 serial ATA connectors near the CPU, but placement is a bit better than what we had on the 939 LanParty. There are 2 additional serial ATA connectors on the lower right corner of the motherboard. This motherboard offers an AGP 8X slot and 5 PCI slots. It also has 2 USB headers, and in the corner there are also a power and reset button, very useful for this kind of open bench setup. There's also a firewire connector somewhere on the motherboard, it's very easy to miss it. Since we will be using the same Enermax radiator, we will start with removing the original mounting plate and replacing it with a new one. Next, we will proceed with installing the CPU and the radiator. Once this is done, we will fit it on the bench table and proceed with the installation of the rest of the components. And now let's boot it up. The BIOS is by a word, and the options are pretty standard until we get to the Genie BIOS settings. On the RAM configuration page, you can see a plethora of RAM options, but just like with the 939, the RAS to CAS delay must be set to 3, otherwise the motherboard will not boot. The Genie BIOS offers a fixed AGP frequency, which is great for overclock. Also, in case of overclock, keep the LDT frequency ratio number so that the overclocked FSB times this number is lower than 800. Now let's go to Windows and see more details about the configuration. Good thing that there are no more typos here, like there were with the 939 LanParty Ultra D. Now let's look at the benchmarks, and we start with PCMark, and then we move over to SuperPi. Next, we will look at Sandra 2004. This is Cinebench 2003, and this is CPU Bench 2003. Finally, we look at memcache and then at the encoding speed, and we close this batch with the ViewSpec Performance 7.1. Next, we move to graphics benchmarks, and we start with the usual 3D Mark 2001 and then Aqua Mark 3. Code Creatures is next, and we follow it with X2 the threat. The last two graphics tests that we are going to look at in detail are Comanche 4 and Unreal Tournament 2003. Since the next few tests are quite repetitive, I'm going to only show the results, not showing the run anymore. And we will start with Quake Free Arena demos without GL extensions and follow it with the tests for GL extensions. We will continue with two other Quake Free Engine games, Return to Castle Wolfenstein and Jedi Outcast. Serious Sam and Far Cry are next with both 3D and OpenGL renderers. Next, there are some more OpenGL tests. And finally, the benchmarks we introduced a couple of reviews back. Next, we are going to look at two games. Mafia is the first, and Serious Sam the second encounter will be the second.
After so many foul-ups, Salieri gave the job to other people. I only went with them as kind of an insurance policy.
Just sit here and watch, so you don't screw up again. Amateur. The barriers close? Go! Real damn professional.
Look, Ma, I'm a lumberjack.
From the other reviews, we know that the socket 939 Athlon 64 has duplicated the Pentium 4 3.2 GHz performance, while the AthlonXP was 10% slower. On paper, the Athlon 64 socket 754 has a lower frequency than the AthlonXP, which was launched 5 months earlier, but it has 1 MB of level 2 cache. The version we are using in this test was the first one, introduced in September 2003. There's also a 90 nanometer version, which I suspect is very similar to the 939 processor, while this 130 nanometer is closer to AthlonXP. With the Athlon 64 processor, AMD has moved the memory controller inside of the CPU. And I suppose that in order to save costs, they didn't include a dual-channel controller. Will this bring about performance penalties in the benchmarks? Stay tuned for the next episode where we look at the overclocking potential and the graphs for the benchmark results. Thank you and have a nice day.